Group role. Shakespeare said, all the world is a stage, and all the men and women merely players. Using the same metaphor, group all group members are actors and each playing a role. By this term, we mean a set of expected behavior pattern attributed to someone occupying a given position in a social unit. The understanding of role behavior would be dramatically simplified if each of us choose one role and play it out regularly and consistently. We are required to play a number of diverse roles both on and off our jobs. As we shall see, one of the tasks in understanding behavior is grasping the role that a person is currently playing. For example, on his job, Mr. X is a plant manager with electrical industries, a large electrical equipment manufacturer. He has a number of roles to fulfill on that job. For instance, electrical industries employs members of middle management, electrical engineer, and a primary company spokesman in the community. Off the job, he find himself playing still more roles: husband, father, Rotarian, tennis player, number of the Thunderbird Country Club, and president of Homeowners Association. Many of these roles are compatible, while some create conflicts. Example: how does the religious involvement influence his managerial decision regarding layoffs, expenses, account padding, or providing accurate information to government agencies? Thus, we are all required to play a number of roles, and our behavior varies with the role we are playing. Role identity and perception. There are certain attitudes and actual behaviors consistent with a role and they create a role identity. People have the ability to shift roles rapidly when they recognize that the situation and its demands clearly require major changes. For example, when union steward were promoted to foreman positions, it was found that their attitude changed in from pro-union to pro-management within a few months of their promotion. When this promotion had to be later resigned because of economic difficulties in the firm, it was found that the demoted foreman and once again adopted their pro-union attitudes. When the situation is more vacuum and the role one has to play is less clear, people often revert to old identities, in spite of the fact that some of the former losers were now winner by society's standard. They found it very difficult to deal with the winners role when placed in an environmental in which they had always been losers with the role requirements ill defined. Identities becomes clouded and individuals reverted back to old patterns of behavior. One's own view of how one is supposed to act in a given situation is a role prescripto based on the interpretation of how we believe we are supposed to behave. We engage in certain types of behavior. Where do we get this perception? One author suggests that we all learn roles from such media as movies, books, and television, and from friends. If this is true, we might purpose that many persons may have formed their roles, identities, perceived their favorite character. Of course, the primary reason apprentice apprenticeship programs exists in many trades and professions is to allow individuals to watch an expert so they can learn to act as they are supposed to. Role expectations and conflict. Role expectations are defined as how others believe you should act in a given situation. How you behave is determined to a large part by a role defined in the context in which you are acting. The role of a parliament member is viewed as having properly and dignity, whereas a football coach is seen as aggressive, dynamic, and inspiring to his players. When role expectations are concentrated into generalized categories, we have role stereotypes. During last decades, we have seen a major change in the general population's role stereotypes of females. In 1950, a woman's role was to stay home, take care of the house, bring up children, and generally care for her husband. Today, most of us no longer hold these stereotypes. Girls can aspire to be doctors, lawyers, managers, and astronauts, as well as more traditional activities of nurse, school teacher, secretary, or housewife. In other words, many of us have changed our role expectation of women, and similarly, many women carry new role perception. In the workplace, it can be helpful to look at the role expectations through the perspective of the psychological contract, an unwritten agreement existing between employees and the employer. It sets the mutual expectations, what management expect from workers and vice versa. In effect, this contract defines the behavioral expectation but that go with every role. Management is expected to treat employees justly, provide acceptable working conditions, clearly communicate what is a fair day's work, and give feedback on how well the employees is doing. In turn, employees are expected to respond by demonstrating a group attitudes, following directions, and showing loyalty to the organization. When an individual is confronted by divergent role expectations, the result is role conflict. It exists when the individual finds that compliance with one role requirement by make more difficult the compliance with another. At the extreme, it would include situations where two or more role expectations are mutually contradictory. The issues of ethics in business demonstrates a well published areas of role conflict among corporate executives. A recent study found that 57% of Harvard Business Reviews readers and experienced the dilemma of having to choose between what was profitable for their firm and what was ethical. Spatial influences on role. Research evidence indicates that the way individuals position themselves within a group, that is a spatial arrangement that they voluntarily develop, is far from random. Spatial factors can also determine who within a group will be chosen or accepted for leadership role. When one wants to take on the role of adversary PR to emphasize superior subordinates relationship, it is natural to place a barrier between himself and others to identify a we they distinction. This may more readily be illustrated by comparing a traditional classroom situations where the instructor stands in front of the class before a podium with the students in clearly established neat rows and columns, and a less structured situation with the chair geographically disappears about in the circle and the instructor taking one of the seats in the circle. The latter positioning can be expected to increase group interactions, reduce the feeling of superior subordinates interactions, and place the instructor on more equal footing with the students.